Welcome to the Cannabis Professor, a marijuana science and culture podcast, broadcasting from the state of Pennsylvania to the rest of the nation and the world. My name's Scott, I'm your professor, and thanks for joining me today. Now, in this episode, we're going to take a look at one of the most popular phrases you will hear when in a cannabis dispensary. It's said by customers, it's said by patients, and employees alike, all the way from first-time smokers to Grandpa Weed himself. Everybody seems to want to know, what has the highest THC percent that you got? Now, I know it's not that bad of a question, right? If you work in the industry, I will recommend you absolutely better know exactly what dank-ass strains you have, what killer vapes, and what super heady dabs are the strongest, most potent, highest THC you got in the building. But the real question underneath of this is, does high THC mean a better experience? Is shopping purely by the rank on the high scoreboard the best way to achieve top effects? Because I can tell you it certainly is a topic with many, many opinions, and we might even find some truth. Now, before we get started, I always like to mention a bit of the inspiration behind this episode, or any episode, so that way you know a bit more about where I'm coming from and where I'm likely heading. You know, in the last episode, which also happened to be the first episode in this new season 3, I had on Chef Brandon Allen with me as the guest. He is an incredible human being, a trained chef classically. He was the High Times 2017 Top Chef winner, the first time that they actually issued it. And he also works for a great organization called the Trichomes Institute. By all means, feel free to check them out at trichomeinstitute.com. Amazing cannabis education. Very similar-minded folks like myself, but well in front of anything I'm pulling off at this stage as well. A very formal practice in cannabis. And he was, we're obviously talking about cannabis and a lot more. And he mentioned that although he is, I guess, ever more known in the cannabis realm, that he doesn't necessarily show up like most folks in cannabis. He isn't just like smoking all the weed in the room and bringing the craziest dabs to the party. He actually said that he prefers like hemp cigarettes. And he has the tolerance of a baby, as he said a couple times too. And he made a really good point, towards the end of the episode. I absolutely guarantee you should give it a listen if you have the time. But he mentioned that, he went from a lifestyle of less healthy to more healthy. And over that time, he didn't really change his cannabis intake. And as a result, cannabis went from helping him medically a bit to kind of creating maybe less helpful tendencies, paranoia, anxiety, triggering things which are usually considered negative in the experience. And he said, really, as you get healthier, the need or the function of cannabis changes in the body. As we change, what our bodies need also changes. And so his story embodies the idea that, using cannabis is really a delicate game of constantly tweaking. You're always finding new products and trying to figure out where they fit in your schedule, as well as sometimes losing access to older products. Sometimes companies or growers don't grow the same thing all the time, or, other things happen to the strain as it's growing, which might ruin the crop. And so you do always have to pay a lot of attention. It's like finding food, right? You're always looking at new menus, trying to figure out what to eat. And so that got me thinking, honestly. Thinking about my own health, of course, my tolerance, how I tend to dose. And I thought, is there a chance that maybe I might be consuming my cannabis in a way that is more driven by my general habit, what I've done in the past, more than the way I am now, the data of my current living. As I philosophized about it a bit, I thought, we probably all could take at least a bit of a look at our behaviors, especially related to cannabis, but even beyond that, I'm sure, and probably make some adjustments to them so that we can benefit in some small, if not larger way. It's all a matter of notching it in every day. Now, just as a small tangent as well, shout out to the Pennsylvania Cannabis Festival. I was luckily able to have a little bit of time last week, and I made it there on 4/24. It was a Sunday, held in Kutztown, Pennsylvania. Now, I would recommend to anybody out there who might be interested in going to one of these cannabis festivals. They're held usually throughout all the warm months. Kutztown one, the one in Pennsylvania, if you're close by, was one of the most scenic rides I've probably ever been on, and I've lived in PA my whole life. it was like a literal video postcard of every amazing red-covered bridge and farmland, and even, Amish people from Lancaster. I probably passed no less than maybe 5 to 10 of those little horse and buggies with various age people just hauling butt on the side of the road. Now, don't worry, you didn't miss much in case you can't make it there. You're not close. I took footage of the whole day with my man Keegan, who I've been working with on the show. Had an amazing time there, and actually was able to get a new dab tool, which if you're looking at this on video, you might see, from a company called TI Tools, I believe. And I also was able to get this plush Kirby that I have behind me in these videos now. So check it out on YouTube at the U.S. Chamber of Cannabis. And by all means, check out Canna festivals. You never know what you're going to get when you go there. I should have that episode up hopefully in a week or two, if not by the middle of the month of May. And we'll have a podcast episode to catch up with, most likely on top of that. But right before I was able to go to CannaFest, New Jersey happened to launch their rec market. I had an episode right before they kicked it out just talking about speculation. When was it going to happen? What are we going to see? And they hit on 4/21, the day after. 4/20, marijuana Christmas. And it was insane. Now, for those who didn't know by now, I happen to work in cannabis. And I've worked in there a while now, for probably somewhere close to 4 years. I work for a very large company called Verano. They're multi-state, what they call an MSO. I didn't start working for them. They acquired a company I worked for before called Terra Vita. And I just wanted everybody to know out there, I think we mentioned in the last episode, but moving forward as we grow bigger, it's good to remind everyone that this show is not affiliated with Verano. I don't represent their company on this show. I've been into cannabis for 20 years. Verano has not been around nearly that long. And so I hope you can all understand that when I speak to you through this avenue, although I do have access to cannabis through the business side, I am never going to be here as a representative of that company. And as I talk about the rec market, I'm not talking about it from the side of business Verano as much as just the side of an amazing cannabis enthusiast seeing a market launch. So if that makes sense, then I'll digress back to the story. So I was working in the rec market for that first solid week. And it was busy, my friends. As you would imagine, New Jersey loves cannabis. And you even have people coming from PA and New York, as I mentioned in the previous episode, leaking in and getting their cannabis too. And I noticed, even more than in the medical market, in the rec market, this particular question did come up all the time. People who first time in the dispensary don't really know, what are you supposed to ask? Random bud tender, random adult. You might be talking to cannabis for the first time, and they don't know you, and you don't know them. So a lot of people devolve to, what is the highest THC you got? I'm looking for flower, I'm looking for vapes, but I'm actually looking for a high score. And personally, I do use concentrates, and they are very high potency comparatively. They're up in the 60s, 70s, maybe even 80th percentile. So they are freaking strong, right? No question about it. But I don't ask for the strongest ones. Things that are in the 90s, things that are purposefully just aiming at a top number. I mean, if you go for dabs and you want a big number, diamonds in sauce or just diamonds, they test damn near 100%. I mean, we had one strain in PA that launched at 102.79%. Yeah, I know. Math is weird, and that technically isn't a real number. But diamonds form pretty much as pure THCA. So we do know that if you really want the high score, there is a way to get it. But I wouldn't say the best experience lies at the end of that journey. A lot of folks out there like growers, other weed connoisseurs, master dabbers, and other people out there shop differently, not just by the high score, but by other means. And so today, as we take a dive into this sort of critique of high THC to figure out if it's a winning strategy, we have a list of questions we'll look at specifically. First, what does high THC mean in one product versus another? What would you say is the minimum requirement for it to be considered a high score? Number two, what is the smallest appreciable difference in potency that is actually possible to notice, right? Like, let's say you had two products and there was a 1% difference in potency, 50 versus 51. Would you actually feel the difference, or how many percents are necessary before you actually notice there is a difference in the overall effects? Number three, what kind of impact does high potency THC have on the plant health? Obviously the plant has to grow in a certain way to achieve those numbers. So it's interesting to think about how the plant would grow in that way. And then last question, what kind of impact does this high potency dosing have on human health? So, a couple final thoughts we mixed in there, I'm sure, but we have a nice healthy list of things to think about today. So let's go back to the top and start with, what does high THC mean in one product versus another? And so I usually divide cannabis into 5 major categories, hopefully makes sense to you as well. Mainly flower is the first one, the most natural, raw cannabis, usually dried and cured. We'll also have vapes, right? Things that come in a cartridge. We have dabs, things that come in a self-serve container, and that's live or cured. I don't care. We're just calling them dabs in general. We also have topicals, things that go through the skin, and edibles, things that go into the belly. And they each, I would imagine, have a different sort of threshold of what would define them as being higher potency, or I guess medium versus low potency. So first we'll start off with flower at the top. And I actually have a bag of some flower here. So let's take a look at like 4 or 5 of these items and see what we have is top percent. All right, there we are. So firstly, some flower from Jersey. And the labs were wiped off, so I can't even read those. Let's see, a little bit from Kind Tree Alpine OG flower. We're looking at 2.3% total terpenes, but when we take a look at the cannabinoids, THC, adding the numbers together, we're right about at 23.7%. So just under 24%. Well, it's a pretty good number. I wouldn't say it's the highest one I've heard, but I would consider that kind of like a mid-high level strain. Let's see what else we have here. We have a little mac and cheese coming in at 27%, and I would start considering that a little bit on the higher side of potency. I have some Calypso flower here from PA, and this is testing just over 18%, and I would call that middle potency, although it does sound low compared to what we just talked about. And then the last one I have on my desk right here is Wedding Gelato from, who is this? Modern Flower. And we're coming in right at about 19% on that one of THCA. So it seems that just from a random grab of things from a bag, we're right in the like mid-teens to maybe mid-20s, high teens to high 20s kind of area. But I know that isn't the highest THC I've ever seen, probably not the highest THC you've ever heard of. And so I went online, naturally, right? The best place to find anything, and went to see if there was THC higher than that. I've always heard 30% are kind of where THC starts to flatline. And in Pennsylvania, I can say from memory, there's a strain Cresco put out called Bio Jesus, a well-known sleeper, kind of like a super indica if you think of it that way. And Bio Jesus tested at, I want to say 37% and change at one point. And that was the highest THC I've ever seen. If it goes over 35, that's a notable day. But even as I was trying to find, what's the world record, let's say, what can we find? OaksterdamUniversity.com has an article published September 30th of last year, 2021, that says cannabis at 40% THC is a myth. So even before I was able to find the number, I actually found information saying the number might even be bullshit no matter what you find. But with that being said, it seems that the strongest weed ever tested was at 44%. And it was called Berlin. And I guess it also came from Berlin. So they tested this back in 2010. So this is, I guess, almost a 12-year-old record at this point, somewhere around there. And generally 40%, that's like shitty dabs. That's like a beat vape card. That's like a low percent for concentrates. But to find that in flower is incredible. So even if you think 44%, maybe that was just a fudge in the numbers, they did find other batches around 37.9 and 39.7 in 2009 and 2011. So it looks like you can find buds pretty consistently over the 30% value that are, I guess, tested well enough to believe that they are actually in that realm. So I guess if, high 30s or low 40s would be the limit, then what would high potency be for flower? Well, I'd imagine anything closer to 30% than anything else. If you're below 20, I would say you're like a normal flower, maybe 20, maybe even up to 24 would be like normal potencies, quote unquote. And then once you get maybe above 25, I think that's high potency undeniably, even though it might go up to 40, in certain lab testing. So at least for flower, 25 I would say is kind of a good line. If it's below 25%, I would have a hard time saying it's high potency, just given the other numbers. So we'll keep that as a main one for right now. And so it seems like one or two of my flowers might have been close enough to be high potency. We also then have vapes. And vapes, you're going to find a big difference depending on the style of vape. There's things like liquid live resin, CO2 extraction, and distillate. And of all the types of vapes out there, distillate is usually the highest tester. If you work in a market and somebody comes in and says, I want the highest THC, if you're the person, let's say, who comes in and asks that, generally you're going to be looking towards a distillate style vape product if they have it. Distillate in cannabis works just like distillate does in alcohol, right? You boil it and it gets rid of impurities, purifies it, and oftentimes can further concentrate it into higher percentages due to that purification. And so when you take distillate from cannabis, you usually have products that don't necessarily taste like cannabis as much. I find it's very common for high potency distillate to be flavored with botanical terpenes, flavors that come from other areas of our market, like fruits, flowers. It's how they flavor bubblegum, ideally. They'll put the same approach to flavoring in the cart, and that may not be a bad thing for you if you don't like the taste of cannabis, but at the very least, they're just things to think about as you aim at high potency products. And as far as where the line is, well, as far as what I've had, at least I speak from experience purely, I've seen live resin usually max out somewhere in the mid to high 70s, 77, 78% THC or THCA cannabinoids generally seem to be where live resin kind of settles. I'm sure there's a couple in the 80s, but I generally see it in the sort of low 60s to high 70s % realm. However, distillate undeniably has gone into the 90s. I've seen like a 94% distillate cartridge. So I would say that high potency means above 80% in cartridges, maybe even above 85% in cartridges. That's truly high potency. Most carts might settle somewhere between like 55 and 75. And although that is super high potency, we're just talking about 40 being high. We're talking about extracts and concentrates. The word literally says concentrate in it, which means to pack it into, if anything, up that sort of density of potency that's in there. So flower is going to be maybe 25 to 40% is the high potency realm. With vape carts, you're up in the 80s and 90s. With dabs, well, dabs are pretty much going to fall in the same realm as vapes, I would say. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you can get diamonds at 100%, and I don't think you can really find anything that close to 100% in any other product style. So knowing that diamonds are the highest THC you got, if they're in the building, diamonds or sand, I guess if they call it that, are going to definitely be the highest THC you got. Not a whole lot of people running away with them most days, I'll be honest with you. Just kind of funny given the question being asked so often. But I hunt for concentrates that are usually in, the 60s or 70s. I'm probably looking more at the terp profile than I am at the potency though. And I don't want to go into it. We've gone into it before. A lot of you folks out there who've been into cannabis a while already know what I'm talking about. It's all about those terps, right? So I like getting somewhere between maybe 2 and 4% terpenes in my products. Not always the most, but I like a lot of flavor. And so in the things I have on my desk, we have a Purple Mountain Majesty live sauce, some Snow Cone live rosin batter, and even some Kosher Tangy here from Cresco, some live sugar. And Kosher Tangy right here is even showing THC right at the 76%. For a live product, as I said, high 70s seems to be where they average quite a bit. I think the Snow Cone rosin batter was at 68. Purple Mountain Majesty was slapping around 76. So as you can see, they fall right in that high potency, but not the highest potency possible, as I like to shop flavor, not just how much it messes you up. And then we go into the other side, right? That's flower, vapes, and dabs. But what about edibles? That doesn't really dose the same. That's not really percentile dosing like, with alcohol. It's not the percent that tells you how potent it is. And then even with topicals, which is even stranger, because does anybody even come in, I guess, and ask for like the highest THC potency in a lotion or a transdermal product that you have? I mean, I'm sure you exist. And if you do, let me know about your experience. Hit me up, DM me, comment on my next post on IG at thecannabis.professor. I'd love to hear, or at least identify individuals who may have actually asked what seems to be a rather unpopular question. What's the strongest THC you've got or the highest percent you have in topicals? It's a weird one. But as far as edibles, I know we can get there, in New Jersey, at least as an example. Every edible in New Jersey they sell is going to be 10 milligrams standard. Some of them you can kind of take a smaller bite for smaller effects, but 10 milligrams would be where they have as a solid dose. Here in Pennsylvania, I think our smallest dose product was at 2.5 milligrams, but I don't think you can find one under 5 currently. So somewhere in that 2.5 to 5 milligrams is like a starter dose in most states. So that means, if that's how small a starter would be, they say 2.5 milligrams is right at the edge of perception. Well, then what exactly would be a high potency dose? Well, from the products side of it, usually somewhere between 50 and 100 milligrams would be considered high potency. Now, I'm not telling you that as a suggestion, and I'm not telling you that as a recommendation at all. I'm telling you that just purely from the shoppability standpoint. I often see when they release edibles, you'll have 5s, you'll have 10s, you'll have, maybe even 20, 25. We do have 30s in Pennsylvania, and then it jumps to 50, and then 100 is next. So I find the math usually works itself out to be right in that kind of ballpark, where you can kind of start very low, around 5, maybe even less. But I would say 50 to 100 is going to be your highest potency. 30 and above, I would say, is high potency in general. So if you're eating below 30 milligrams, that's probably not that crazy to me. You take a 25 milligram cap, it is strong. But I know people who take hundreds of milligrams in a day. I would say 30 to 50 is kind of where the line is for where things get high potency. But you don't often hear too many people talk like that. In lotions or transdermals or anything like that. Well, in PA, Cresco did have a transdermal patch. And I know they have one down in Florida by a company called Move. Couple things like that do exist across the nation. But it's a little different when you're talking high potency in that product category, because transdermals bypass all your organs. It just goes right to your bloodstream. So although I feel comfortable eating, in edibles category, probably 40 or 50 milligrams I can get away with without really having too much of an issue. In the transdermal patch, it was a 20 milligram patch that I would say hit like 70 milligrams for like almost 12 hours too. Depending on how you used it, you might be able to get more than 12 hours out of that effect or out of that product specifically. So, it isn't always the same feeling depending on where you put it. And I would say, at least in transdermals, 20 milligrams felt absolutely potent enough to consider it high potency. I only have the one experience, so I will back away from the mic for a second, at least say, if you know more, by all means, inform me. As I said, hit me on IG, thecannabis.professor. I'd love to hear what your opinions are on those areas, edibles and topicals especially. It's an open call I'm throwing out there. Now, given I'm sure there are people who have eaten 1,000 milligrams either by accident or on purpose, and I would imagine that once you get above 100, it's all individual, bio-individuality, all those sorts of thoughts come into my head. But at the very least, going down the run of most products, 25% or over for flower, maybe somewhere in the 50 to 70s is where it starts for vapes as well as for dabs. And then in edibles, I would say between 30 and 50 would be where high potency begins. Now that brings us to our second question, which is, would you even feel it, right? What is the smallest difference in potency that a person can actually notice? Is it 1%, 5%, 1 milligram, 5 milligrams? Where are we at? Well, depending on the fact we just said 2.5 milligrams is the lowest dose, most folks in a scientific community say it might actually be below perception or right at the edge of it for a lot of people. We already have our answer, right? 2.5 milligrams seems to be the small sail that changes direction in the experience in edibles. But I would also say 5 is probably a good number. 5 milligrams is also a low and significant dose where it'll probably change the experience and you'll notice it. But you might not notice much. You take 100 milligrams, I'm sure 5 milligrams doesn't do a whole lot. But in flower, I'd say this is the area, especially in flower, in vapes and dabs. This is an area where, as I was working in the dispensary, as I was hearing people talk, it was one of the harder things to explain the value of. I mean, how do you tell somebody who says they want the highest THC you got that there might be a different way to approach it that could benefit them in the long run? You don't want to disagree with folks, obviously, when you're in a retail setting, but you do want people to be able to enjoy themselves to maximum benefit. So the lowest percent in flower I would say a person might notice is somewhere between 3 and 5%. Now, it's tough because if you look at a package and you read exactly what's on the back, your mind immediately starts to create expectations. And fulfilling those expectations, sort of the foresight of what you think might happen, it affects what happens. It's just like the placebo effect, or as Chef Brandon said, the nocebo effect. The idea that when somebody tells you something's going to work a certain way, it happens to be a measurable or at least significant enough factor in how it impacts you. If somebody tells me I'm going to eat gummies that are supposed to put me to bed, I have that idea in my head now, and it might actually influence the outcome. Isn't that kind of crazy? Like, if you tell me it works, it might work better. If you tell me I'm supposed to be awake, I might stay awake. If you tell me it's supposed to put me to sleep, it might actually give me better rest. Power of belief, right, everybody? The power of the mind. It's an incredible tool we have between our ears, and Lord knows if we ever figure out how to use it properly. But especially as we add cannabis to the situation in our brain, it shows that the packaging is going to influence the outcome, what the bud tender tells you, or what you told the customer if you are a bud tender listening. And we do have to be rather, kind with our language, right? Pay very close attention, because even when you're just trying to finish a statement, turn a phrase, you may end up saying something which somebody remembers indefinitely. You may have heard something that you just won't forget. That bud tender told me that I should only use sativas because they give you energy. And then a person almost uses it like Bible, where every time you're in, you shop based on that information. You start building your whole way of using cannabis based on the influence from that information. And I would imagine, like a lot of folks, that hopefully it was good info, because if it wasn't, you could be making some skewed decisions for a long time. And even with that being said, somebody making bad decisions, they might still end up being okay because you were told that it was okay. And that immediately influences, it almost removes how bad it can be and pushes it towards better just because of the mentality a person's in. So I'm sure we can all appreciate a good dose of forward thinking in those areas. And in flower, as I said, between 3 and 5%. If I gave somebody a strain that was 20% and one that was 25% THC, I'd imagine, the right kind of smoker would notice the difference in potency. Maybe the effect didn't feel as pronounced. But I'd say maybe 60 to 80% of people who use cannabis would not notice. I think it is possible to notice. Some folks are really, really attentive to what happens in their minds. They have very, very acute abilities to measure differences. But I think most people would probably not notice 5%. I would say most people probably are influenced purely by being told. You close your eyes, I let you smoke a joint of one strain or the other. It'd probably be tough to figure out the potency just based on that test alone. So at least in flower, 3 to 5% would be the starting area. I would say in vapes and dabs, maybe 10%. Because I use ones that are in the 60s, I use ones that are in the 80s, and they all just feel damned thorough. The terp profile seems to determine a lot more of that depth of impact than just the percent. But if I do dab diamonds, I do have an experience which is measurably different. I think the times when I first tried with diamonds, and you might have had an experience like me if you've tried them, it was almost like cannabis blackout. Like I almost had no memory from the point that I dabbed it to the point I went to bed, knowing that most of those days it was, late enough where sleep was probably the only consideration I had at that point. But to be, truly honest, it felt like blacking out on liquor kind of, but on weed. Didn't really have much to think about, didn't really have much to remember, and kind of just slowly made my way to the bed in a very animalistic function, kicking off the pants, leaving the sock in the leg hole, not even brushing my teeth. I think I even left the dabs out. So in that very same way, I know diamonds absolutely hit different than everything else, and that's high THC. So you would definitely notice, 100% versus 70%. I feel like maybe 10% is around that threshold. And in vapes, I'm going to say the same. Maybe 10% is about the same since they're both concentrates. 60 to 70%, somebody out there is going to feel a difference. it's actually, this is the sort of thing I like to test. So maybe as we expand the video side of this in the U.S. Chamber of Cannabis on YouTube, look forward to a little potency test. I kind of like that, actually. Grab some folks out there. Maybe if you're out there and you want to volunteer, bring your own weed, right? Because legal rules are there, unless we go to New Jersey to do it. But I'd love to see if there are folks out there who feel like they are sensitive enough to cannabis where they can actually feel lower percent differences. That'd be a hell of a thing to test out, I think, at this level. And so that takes us then to our third question, right? First, we found some thresholds, asserting just some very vague ideas of what you can and can't feel potentially. And then we have to think about the plant. What kind of impact does high potency THC have on the plant health itself? And no, I don't mean like I'm going to smoke a bunch of weed and then blow it at like a live cannabis plant and see how it does. I don't mean that sort of cannibalism weirdness. What I'm talking about more so is if I have some buds and they're testing up in the 35, 37, 44, right, in Berlin, I'm getting these massive numbers out of it. Exactly how healthy was that plant? Was it super healthy? And that's why I got big numbers? Or was it the opposite of health and maybe unbalanced, and that's why I got those numbers? What does high potency really mean for the plant? And this, my friends, introduces us to trichomes, right? I'm sure you've heard the word before if you nerd out like I do. Trichomes are very important for the plant and very important for us, the consumers. Maybe not a word you use all the time, although in the cannabis field, we do say the word trichome often. But trichomes are the sticky resinous growths that grow out of the pores on the surface of the cannabis plant. It is one of the reasons why we call sugar leaf, because it sparkles like it's covered in sugar, and those are the trichomes. They're little oil sacs in a way, sort of like if you grew hair, but the hair had a little mushroom top full of oil. The oil inside those trichomes is what provides the main effects of cannabis. It's the ones we look for when we're extracting from it. It's what's in your cartridge. It's what's in your dab container. It's what's all over your flower. The trichomes and the oil resins that they contain are really the focal point of the magic of cannabis. Now, trichome is an interesting word because it comes from an old Greek term, trichoma, spelled similarly but not the same, and trichoma means growth of hair. So in a way, trichomes do grow out of the pores of the plant. Our hair grows out of our skin pores. So you can see that, the reference to hair makes a lot of sense. Now, maybe you don't have a microscope. Maybe you've never typed the word trichomes into your browser. Maybe you're scared the feds will find you. But you have run into trichomes before, out in the plant world, I guarantee. You ever rolled around in grass and got all itchy when it was freshly cut? It's probably because you got a little bit of its sort of anti-human approach. Those trichomes that were on the actual grass itself contain oils that can irritate, right? That can cause sneezing and things like allergies, showing, just like with cannabis, a lot of plants function in this way. They grow these trichomes, these little oil sacs of hair, as a defense technically. So it's the way the plants kind of armor themselves against the environment and other things like animals, insects, bacteria, fungus, considerations like that. So we're animals, and of course we do attack plants, right? We eat them all the time. Plants don't want to be eaten, I assume. They probably want to live on their own and not just get cut down and boiled. And so if you take a blade of grass and you run your thumb upwards on it or downwards on it sometimes, you'll feel one direction is smooth and the other one kind of catches. What you're catching on is little growths that are much like these trichomes, little hairy growths. They kind of grow in a grain, just like you have to brush your hair sort of with your part, cowlicks aside. And these trichomes are going to hold these interesting pieces of chemistry for plant matter. Unlike anything on the inside of the plant, the defense is much different than the biology internally of these plants. And so when a THC or when a marijuana plant is growing with high potency, with THC in the 30%, what it really means is that if you were to take a leaf of that cannabis plant, that 30% of all the molecules on that leaf, including all of the insides, is just THC, or THCA, if you will. It means that considering stems, seeds, chlorophyll, cell walls, cell membranes, all the little pieces of a plant. That 30% of all of its energy and mass is just one molecule in that oil gland. Now there are, up to 60, 100, who knows, the incredible amount of chemistry happening inside of that little oil sac. And we, my friends, are asking for a one-note song when we ask for high potency THC products. Now, let me move it into human terms, and I've done this once before, but I'll do it again. Imagine you have a kid. Some of you out there might already have children, so not hard to imagine. But imagine you have a child, and your mission is to have this kid test high potency THC, in the human way. So you want that kid to have 30% of its hair oil of one chemical in its hair oil specifically, like THC. I think in humans they call it sebum. Probably not. It's probably like sebum or something. SEBUM. Funny looking word, and I think they say it's the oil that like comes out of your pores a little bit, surrounds some of the hair, that greasy kindness that you might have. That's called sebum. And so let's consider that to be, it's not the same, but similar enough to say we secrete that, just like plants secrete THC oils and terpenes and other things. So imagine having this kid and trying to grow this child so that, not that he's 30% hair, which would also be insane, right? Kid weighs like 50 pounds. He's got to be like over 10 pounds of hair. 17 pounds, I think, would be around there to be that much hair. It's an incredible amount by weight if that was hair, let alone if you were just looking for one oil made out of the hair of this kid who is now 17 pounds of hair and I guess like 40 pounds of everything else. Insane to think what the health of that individual would be, right? What an unbalanced way to grow if you're going to grow more hair than anything. Sure, I have a lot of hair. If you're looking at this on video, you can see these are some long dreadlocks I have. Not the longest. I know plenty of people in the market and beyond. Hats off to Steve Reisner. That man can sit on his dreads and probably make a hammock out of them. They're so long. I don't know if I'll ever get there. But to think, even with this much hair, even with the amount that Steve Reisner at Potency has, still not 30% of my weight. And still not 30% of that hair is even just an oil, right? I got all sorts of crap probably stuck in this hair from growing long dreadlocks. Maybe there's even some weed in here still. So you have to consider, how healthy would a plant be to be so specific about growing just one note, 30% of its weight by volume? Potentially that is not a healthy plant. And the thought does exist that if you consume unhealthy plants, that might not be the best thing for a healthy person, right? You don't want to eat rotten fruit. You don't want to eat like poorly stored meat. You don't want to really consume things that weren't healthy. I remember watching movies about the meat industry and, horrible things that we do to animals to be able to eat them. Horrible things we do to plants too, my friends. Believe me, nobody's getting out alive. And it was talking about, pesticides, talking about hormone treatment in animals, talking about farm raising fish and the fact that they feed them like poop from other animals and massive amounts of just chemistry being involved. And that a lot of these animals aren't treated well. They don't go get grass fed, right? They're not named. We don't celebrate their birthdays, whatever level of hippiness you'd like to imagine. Instead, we're just jamming them full of chemicals and feeding them corn. And so a lot of the issues we have with food, we imagine might be due to source. Was the food you're eating actually healthy when it was alive? And if it was, that probably means good things for you. A healthy spinach is probably better than unhealthy spinach, right? Fresh versus rotten. And I'm sure that cannabis has a very similar relationship where I want to be smoking weed that comes from a healthy plant, a plant that had time to grow and stabilize and balance its approach. Because what I get from cannabis is going to be based on the health of that plant. I don't want to get powdery mildew. I don't want any poop in my pipe. I don't want some shitty middies, right? Or some like dog ass brown weed swag. I want that fresh green, crispy with a little juice. And I want to make sure that that plant was healthy so that it can provide to me the healthiest mixture of chemistry for my own benefit. And so high THC, high potency might be very bad for the individual plant. Knowing that we're stressing it out, we're pushing it within limits of what it's even possible to grow. The light cycles, the genetics, the breeding, we are really doing a hell of a job. And that really does bring us around to one of our ending thoughts, which is, given all of these thresholds and percentile differences and high scores we're trying to figure out, what does it all mean for human health? What kind of impact does constant high potency dosing have on the individual? Because if every time I go into a dispensary, if every time I smoke weed, I need to use the highest potency products, 30% plus on the flower, right? Up in the 90s in carts. I'm dabbing diamonds like it's my job, which, I mean, it's not my job, but it's part of my job. What does that mean? Am I healthier then? Right? Is that individual who's just smoked out all the time, are they promoting homeostasis in a way which is benefiting them? Much like Chef Brandon said at the end of his episode, you know, if you don't change the way you're dosing and you change, shouldn't everything change along with you? I mean, should you be doing the same thing you were doing when you were 4 years old, when you're 40 years old? Should you be eating the same baby food? Probably not. Most likely things have changed, and respecting those changes is very important. It's probably, you know, the focal point of a lot of how we attain health in our lives. And so looking at human health, we run into balance, right? We run into homeostasis, the big scientific word that means the tendency to seek equilibrium when faced with external or internal changes even. So the fact that we get tired, we go to sleep, we wake up with more energy, we are performing a cycle of homeostasis. And I think the idea of a cycle is one of the most core foundational ideas to keep in mind as we talk about health, because we often measure health in a very linear way. Health is a heart rate, health is a BMI. You know, I've mentioned this before. It's a very logical approach. You can almost graph your health in a way. And although I appreciate math, you know, I love testing. You can tell the logic in a lot of the way that my mind thinks. Life is a circle. You know, we live on a big old blue marble. Time is often shown as a line, right? Timelines, it's right in the language. But to be honest with you, I have this sneaking suspicion that the concept of a spiral is a hell of a lot more realistic to how life goes than lines are specifically. You know, life is a cycle. You go through the year, there's 4 seasons, they tell me. I live in PA, so we get about 3.5 every year. You know, summer, winter, fall, springtime, where we are right now. That cycle could be represented as a circle, right? Rolling along, the wheel in the sky keeps on turning, I believe Journey said. So as you see that wheel moving, well, as a wheel moves, if you were to put a little point of light on the outside of your tire and you were to drive down the road, it would look like a weird kind of spiral, you know, like a fractal kind of overlapping, because your wheel is spinning and then going through a distance, you know, through a time. And I feel like it's probably going to look a lot more like something weird, like a spiral or a staircase kind of thinking, sinusoidal function. Looks like that dog might agree with us too. And so this spiral shows that we oftentimes repeat what we're doing, right? Same shit, different toilet mentality as we spiral through the timeline. And as we think about balance and we think about health, you know, the circle of health, the ability to actually still return to zero every day and rebalance our health. It's just like balancing a tire when you get a new one put on your car. It does create different ideology in the way we should approach health. Because the folks who imagine health as linear often approach health like a video game. I just have to hit a certain score, just got to beat that boss, and then I'm done. I'm good. I'm healthy. As if health is just a status you can stay at. But to me, health is fluid. Health is constant. Health is a practice. Also includes a lot of our relationships. You know, that way it's not so linear. It's not just my weight. It's not just my strength. It's not just my diet. It's how I live. That is my health. And so when you add in high potency THC, well, the thought would be, well, you must be in an unhealthy state, you know, potentially a bigger Band-Aid for a larger wound. And so if I need the highest potency THC you have, I must have a very large issue I'm dealing with. And that's why I have to sort of address it, attack it, treat it, approach it with a strong product. You know, if you have a very small headache, you don't eat all the ibuprofen, right? You take a small dose. So in a lot of the ways we approach cannabis, we might not be embracing the idea of health as much as we're the idea of finance and effective purchasing. And believe me, I said I'm good at math, so I can absolutely appreciate both. But as far as high potency goes, you know, if you're thinking about like a scale even on the linear side and trying to balance your body, high potency dosing would be like dropping a huge weight on one side of the scale. Unless the scale was already so unbalanced, you had to keep dropping these higher dosages on it. the likelihood is you're probably going to unbalance the scale with all that high potency. And even more than that, you're creating a lot of wear and tear inside of the body, because taking high potency products in is kind of like jackrabbit starting your car at every red light. There's going to be a lot more wear and tear. You're probably still going to get to the same damn place you were going if you drive smooth or if you drive kind of jagged like a race car driver. But we all know that race cars break a lot more, right? They have to build those engines like every weekend because of the wear and tear of using, super fuels, things that explode huge, kind of like high potency driving causes more wear and tear. So high potency dosing most likely puts the body through more chemistry. Now I have more THC to process. You don't feel it all. You don't get 100% of anything. And so there's more wear and tear, which means I might build a tolerance quicker. I might stop supporting my natural creation of anandamide, our natural THC. We already make a substance which performs the roles that THC supplements. So if I start packing in THC from the plant world, my animal THC, my anandamide, my AEA, I might stop producing that as much. And this is something that I think we're all aware of in the way that tolerance works in the body. It might actually start dampening the need for my natural chemistry. And believe me, your natural chemistry is the best thing for you, hands down for most folks. So we have to at least understand these things. As we change, what we need changes. And so high potency dosing makes a lot of sense when you're having high potency issues, right? My back is terrible, but not every day. So it's great that I have the choice to be able to dose up in certain areas, but maybe on a day where I wake up and I did my yoga and I drank enough water and I'm eating well and I'm in a good headspace, looking forward to things. I'm thinking about what needs to be done. I'm not stressing out about it. I might not need cannabis as much. Still, it provides awesome things, awesome thinking, creativity, sleep. I'm not saying that it has no use, but what I'm saying is I don't need the fire extinguisher, right? Nothing's on fire. Maybe I'll just open a window and let the cold air in instead of having to extinguish the fire. And I think it makes a lot of sense that as you think about what you're dealing with, as you really try to put your body into the best possible state, it's good to understand exactly how our approaches will affect our health. And although I do own plenty of high potency THC products, smaller doses might be a good idea, right? To balance out, you don't need as much. When you're hunting in the 90s or 80th percentile, you might pack a smaller bowl of flour because it's 32% and you don't need all that THC. I guarantee you're not absorbing it all. The higher potency you get doesn't always mean the higher effect. Especially if you ever heard me go off about myrcene and all that sort of thing, then you already know a little bit about absorption being such a central focus, and the fact that if you create a healthier body, a healthier stomach, a healthier mind, cannabis might start becoming more interruptive rather than sort of therapeutic in those areas. And I have experienced this. As my final thought for it, there are times I cannot sleep. And you've probably heard me refer to it before, at least if you listen to the show a while. I'm like a classic, somewhere between 3:30 and 5:30, I'll wake up. And with how Jersey's been crazy and crazy job and crazy life, crazy podcast, right? There's so many ways to be triggered, so many things to think about. Problem solving, resolving, paying down, whatever it might be. And for whatever reason, between 3:30 and 5:30 in the morning, that's when I want to think about it, right? I don't want to wake up, but you wake up and it's not like a terror, but it ain't like a calm. And there's been enough nights where I've forgotten how many there are, where I have the choice, right? I'm up, 15 minutes becomes a half hour, and I'm just wondering now, am I actually going to get the sleep I seek? I really want to get these last hour, 2 hour, 3 hours in, because sleep is very important, right? If you don't sleep, you don't heal. And here now, instead of healing, my mind's actually just spinning its tires. It's winding, burning gas, but I'm getting nowhere. Nobody really wants to be in that spot. I think a lot of us suffer, unfortunately and unnecessarily. So I thought, well, maybe I'll just find that sleepy, myrcene heavy dab, some good old Axilla or something, and I'll throw that right in my lungs, help me get to sleep. Maybe it'll bail me out of this terrible sort of night interruption. And whether it's the high potency or the fact I shop way too much limonene in my terp profiles, after testing this for what feels like years probably, I know it's a bad idea. I might still do it because, again, I'm a human. I have tendencies. I'm not trying to be perfect. That's not the goal of any of this. It's just enhancing our quality of life. And if your quality of life sucks at that 3:30 to 5:30 in the morning, at least in my experience, dabs have not bailed me out. The high potency dosing, the highest THC product that I have, seems to actually exacerbate the issue. Now I'm thinking even more. I sit there for what feels like 2 straight hours just with my eyes closed, just going through my thoughts, creating all this mental wear and tear before I even start my day. And so I know that high potency in my own life has created, maybe areas of conflict, areas of less quality of life. And that's not what weed's for. That's not what we want to do it for. So thinking back to what I said at the top of the show, is it possible that I may have tendencies that are not data driven? It's just me doing the same things a lot of folks now, walking in, shopping by potency, shopping by effectiveness, not really shopping by experience. This is something that can screw us all. And as a final point, I absolutely understand, and I still will probably shop this way from time to time. I mean, if you live in the same country I do, if you live in a similar enough one, you may have to shop in a capitalistic market. And for all the amazing things about capitalism, certainly not the worst system potentially, but maybe not the best. Because we all know that when you buy something, it always costs more than it does. Right? No matter how cheap that shirt is, the company is making profit off of it, which means the shirt, to create it, to ship it, to stock it, to get it on that shelf, always costs less than you're paying. And so it immediately makes everybody, in almost a nonverbal way, realize that no matter what you buy, you're getting robbed a little bit. So my inclination, whenever I have to buy anything, and this may be a little bit of leftovers from the fact that my dad was sort of a miser, you're always trying to get the most for the least. What's the cheapest cannabis you got with the highest percentage? It makes a lot of sense, because in a capitalism, you're charging me more than the weed should cost. So now to sort of strategize against the profitability, at the very least, you can give me the most high potency product you have, because my dollar goes further. If I spend $10 on 50% and I can buy something for $10 that's 100% THC, aren't I getting twice the product for the cost? I mean, that just makes perfect sense. And we're all good enough at math to figure that one out, I think. And I can't argue with that. Yeah, that's true. You do get twice the potency, but it doesn't mean you get twice the benefit. And that's really what it boils down to. Getting 2 times the math doesn't mean you get 2 times the quality of life or the experience. So many other factors are in there, with absorption, with product style, with your tolerance and experience, with whether or not you passed out in the middle of it. I mean, everything counts. And really, this journey around this question, this thought process is here so that we can understand, how to use better strategy, better foresight, better tactics to really help ourselves out. And it's not to get it perfect. We'll struggle, we'll learn, and we'll make mistakes and hopefully learn from them again. But it's the idea that, it's rare people go to a restaurant and ask for the soup with the most salt. It's rare that you're going, to buy the jeans that have the most physical square inches of material. If you shop that way, you never buy freaking shorts. So hell, half the time I buy shorts, they cost just as much as pants. Isn't that highway robbery? I'm getting like half the material for the same price. People don't really buy the biggest sweater because they think, well, this one has more cotton than the other sweater by, per gram weight. Although some people do shop that way. I do know that, So it's just interesting when you think about this approach in other areas. And you can see that it doesn't always work. So it definitely doesn't always work in cannabis. And overall, a little bit of capitalism, a little bit of potency, a little bit of health, I think really does marry all these ideas into a nice soup of how deep the considerations can be when you actually want to try and tweak your cannabis dosing so that it can benefit you. Is looking for the highest THC a bad thing? Absolutely not. As long as you understand what kind of implication it has for the product and for the person using it. And that, my friends, is all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed a bit of dissertation on that question. Certainly is something that if you're in New Jersey especially, you will hear, you may ask, and you may benefit from or run into some detriment. However, knowing that there's folks out there who consume cannabis beyond what they need, unfortunately, you can get to a level of toxicity. Remember, in cannabis, the trichomes are part of the defense of the plant, and so we are trying to enhance our defense. Hopefully, it never gets to the point where it's offensive. And thank you, everybody, for hanging out and listening as well. Hopefully you found some benefit in your own dosing to it. Now, all these episodes will be on YouTube, so maybe another week or two I'll have the episode that was just recorded up there. Should have an episode coming up there pretty soon in a day or two. Feel free also to check me out on Instagram at thecannabis.professor. I also happen to work with Chill Frog CBD, a great supplier of full spectrum CBD products. I use their sleep gummies, and I would recommend if you have issues with sleep, it is worth a shot. You don't sleep, you don't heal, obviously. Use code Professor30 at checkout, and it will save you 30% on your entire order. And of course, be sure to check out the Trichome Institute. Those fellows over there are doing great work, and hopefully even better work in the future. Until next time, my friends, thanks for hanging out, and be sure to grow knowledge and extract truth. This is the Cannabis Professor, out.